If your idea doesn't make it, or it doesn't become the idea, you can't pout about it and you can't kind of take your ball and go home. Like, we have another meeting next week. We need you to bring your best to that meeting too. And so I think, especially for the point leader, helping everybody recognize the value they bring, even if their idea isn't taken. So when you see someone pouting or being dismissive or disengaging, the problem is they just didn't wear their big boy pants that day. And it's okay to acknowledge that, pull them aside. But I would remind everybody at the beginning of the meeting, I wouldn't use this terminology necessarily, but I would say, hey, we're going to probably have tons of really bad ideas at this meeting. We're going to probably have some good ones. If you think yours is good and nobody else agrees, that's okay. But put your big boy pants on. We can't do it all anyway.
Well, hey there, my name is Bart Blair, and this is Season 3, Episode 24 of the Missional Marketing Podcast. Our goal with this podcast is to help your church grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, I've got a great guest, someone that if you've been listening to or watching our show on a YouTube channel for any length of time, you might be familiar with Gavin Adams. Gavin was on our show back in the summer of 2021. So it's been about a year and a half since he was on the show. And interestingly, the first episode, which we'll link to in the show notes here, has been the most downloaded episode of the podcast since we launched this podcast in 2020. So if you find Gavin to be an interesting contributor to your world of ministry based on this conversation today, I highly recommend that you swing back and listen to that archived episode from about a year and a half ago. Unfortunately, my co-host, my co-podcasting partner, I've had a hard time saying that today, Jason Hamrock got tied up in another meeting and wasn't able to be on the call today. But I did talk about him a little bit. You'll hear me talk about him as we get into this conversation. It's one that as a creative, as a person serving in your local church, I think you're really, really going to find what Gavin shares with us today to be super beneficial, super helpful for your ministry. And if you do, we'd really appreciate you giving us some feedback. You can leave us a rating or review wherever it is that you consume this podcast, whether that's your favorite podcasting app or on the YouTube channel. And of course, you know that by doing that, you help more people find our podcast and will hopefully help more people. That's what we're ultimately in the game of doing, is helping churches reach more people. So thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. And here's my conversation with Gavin Adams. Gavin Adams, welcome back to the Missional Marketing Podcast. Really excited that you could be with me. I would say be with us, but obviously we just got a text from my co-podcasting partner. That's what he would be, Jason Hamrock, my co-podcasting partner, that he got tied up in another meeting and wasn't going to be able to make it. But hey, I'm glad to have the opportunity to hang out with you.
Yeah, same.
The last time you were on our show was the summer of 2021. So it's been about a year and a half. And at that time, you were going through some pretty significant vocational and ministry transition. So why don't you just kind of give us a little bit of backstory in terms of what you were doing at that time, the transition you've made, and what's been happening here for the last year and a half?
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. I spent, 13 years as a lead pastor of Woodstock City Church, and it's a campus location of North Point Ministry. So did that for a long time, longer than I ever thought I would, not because of the job, just because 13 years seems like a long time for anything for me, but did that for 13 years. And I had a couple of things happen, great things happen, where I interviewed for another job at one point and then finished some educational stuff, and kind of the combination really it forced me, Mark, to decide if I felt like the season of leading at that local church was ending and maybe God was opening up something else to do. And so when the other job and some of that didn't work out the way I thought it might, I still felt like it might be time to go, and processed that for a good while with Andy and all the guys at North Point, and eventually decided it was. So I left in August of 2021. August the 1st was my last Sunday. So preached and then walked out into the sunset and had a really, really relaxing month out of that. Everybody who's in ministry knows there's just a unique weight that you carry. I had people tell me before I started the ministry job that the weight was going to be harder, and I just thought they were bad leaders. Then I realized that, nope, it's true. So I shed some of that weight in a good way immediately, and you could tell, and got really to work as quick as I can helping churches. And so I love leadership and I love strategy. I say this so much, but without a system or without strategy, all success we have is accidental and unrepeatable. And then even worse, when something isn't working, you can't fix it because you don't know why it's worked or why it's not working now. So I just love that strategy aspect of ministry. And of course, the way the world continues to evolve so quickly, right? The more, the faster that pace of change, the more we have to adapt. The more we have to remodel church models, the more we have to systematize what we're doing or rethink and resystematize. So that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half, and working with lots of different churches. In 3 different roles, just very quickly, I do a lot of things done for people. I do a lot of longer term consulting engagements and a lot of preaching and strat work and things like that. But kind of do some done with you and done by you stuff. Done with you a lot of master classes and small group experiences where we get together and dig into things like church models or generosity and volunteer systems and all the things that we need to have happen in our churches, discipleship pathways. And then I have courses and products and things like that people can do it on their own. So yeah, how's that for an answer? Is that quick enough?
No, that's real. That's really good, Gavin. You come from a church. You're in a ministry that is very strategic in terms of the way that ministry is done. Do you come by being a strategist naturally? Is that something that you just feel like God has wired you to do?
Yeah, I don't know how. I just assumed everybody was this way until I grew up and realized that I was weird. And I don't know how not to do that. I'm on a 4-lane highway and I pull up to a red light and I'm evaluating I don't just get in the shortest lane. I'm evaluating every car in every lane, what kind of driver I'm very judgmental on this, but what kind of driver I suspect is in each car, which one is not pulled up as far as they could to the line, because I want to go fast as I can through this light. So, it's exhausting to be me, but everything is a strategy. And so, which I think makes for some good organizational decisions. It also can be tiring. So, and what I have found is, as much as I love, the kind of phrase I use a lot on my website is adding intention to your mission. But what I have found, and this is what we all believe in ministry, that there's no mission more important than the mission of the local church. And so if any mission is going to have intention behind it, and if any mission is going to be driven with really great strategies and systems and things like that, it really should be the local church. And in no way taking God out of that, but we talk a lot. Give me 10 seconds on this if you don't mind. But I talk to so many churches who, and I love this too. We want to talk about the local body, the local church as an organism. And it's true, it is an organism. But I've yet to see any organism function healthily without organization. Think about our bodies, right? Like our bodies are so well organized, and put one viral cell in to throw it into disorganization and watch what happens to the organism, right? So helping these organisms, these local churches, become as organized as they can, that's the thing that just fires me up. I love doing that.
Yeah, that's very cool. I can't help but envision, for 20 years, I lived in Canada. And so several times a year, we would drive across the US-Canadian border. And, one of the games that we always played was which customs line is going to move the fastest. Right. Yeah. I wish I had you in the car with me. Maybe I would have gotten through the border a lot faster. Yeah, I get that. Well, hey, I think that, actually you've set us up very well for the topic of conversation that I wanted to have with you today, in terms of talking about strategies and plans. Many of the people who listen to this podcast or watch on our YouTube channel come from a very creative space. We have a lot of communications directors, creative directors, people that are involved in the creative development of weekend worship services, outreach events and activities. And one of the things that I've noted in my life and in my ministry is that creatives often fail to have the kind of discipline, structure, and strategies to their creative process that'll actually enable them to have the most success and to execute well. And so at the time that you and I are recording this podcast, I know for a fact that many of my friends working in churches are sitting around a room with their teams, dreaming about Easter, because that's the season we're in. We're recording this in January, and churches are having their creative planning meetings for their Easter services, Easter outreach events, their post-Easter callback series, anything and everything that they're doing. And you have a blog post on your website that caught my attention: 10 rules to keep creative meetings creative. It seems contradictory that we would create rules in order to be more creative. But I wanted to talk through this blog post with you, this topic of conversation, to those that are listening, to those that are about to go into a creative planning meeting, and give them some rules, give them some guidelines or some guardrails that might actually help them get the most out of their experience. Now, we're only going to cover the first 5 that were on your list. There are 10 on the list. We're going to talk about 5 of them today. We're going to put a link to the full blog post in our show notes. So if you're listening to this or you're watching it and you want to go read the other 5, I advise that you do. But let's start with the number 1 that I have on our list here to discuss, Gavin. And that is, you just simply say, don't kill a bad idea too soon. Why is that an important rule for us?
Yeah, well, let me back up 1 second, then I'll address that rule. As much as I'm a strategist, and this is probably a weird brain problem with me, I'm an artist as well. So I'm a cartoonist or was, I guess, but not a practicing artist now. But I love ideas. I love creativity. Actually, strategy is creativity. It just looks different. So solving problems is creative work. And so what I found constantly as a creative myself who just loves ideas is that we were walking into these creative meetings, and we were having creative meetings once a week, right? We're designing church services every 7 days. It feels like every 3 or 4. So we're constantly creating, and we want every experience to be great. We want it to not just be a great experience, we want it to drive steps, we want it to do the things beyond just create a moment. And so we're having all these incredible creative ideas, these meetings, and too often I think we walked out of these meetings either without allowing the best ideas to surface because they got shut down or what have you, or we walked out with an idea we latched onto in the very beginning, which shut the rest of the process down anyway. So as a creative, I walked out feeling like we might not be getting the best out of the creative meetings. So we created these 10 rules for our creative meetings. So number 1, don't kill a bad idea too soon. I kind of started embracing the phrase, which I know a lot of people do, but this is probably a bad idea, but I would say it constantly. And I learned to say it because if I didn't, it was a bad idea. And people would point it out, and then we would move on to something else. And so when I could acknowledge that this might be a bad idea, but what it typically did is give everybody space to pause and listen. And you know this, in an ideation kind of session in a room, bad ideas are often the birthing grounds for the greatest ideas. But if we shut the bad idea down too quick, we don't allow it to birth or evolve into what it could be. So we just had a rule: you just don't kill ideas in the beginning. We may put them on the parking lot side of the whiteboard, but we're not going to nix anything in a creative meeting because that's what it is. It's about creativity.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that there's a strategy to brainstorming, and one of the things that you want to do when you brainstorm is make sure that you give everybody an opportunity to share their ideas, their thoughts without shutting anything down, even if it feels like a bad idea, even if it feels like it's out of left field, even if it feels like it doesn't align with the strategy or what you're trying to accomplish, because it might actually lead to someone else's idea. That, you said don't kill a bad idea too soon. I would even say don't a lot of people will not share their own idea because they think it's a bad idea.
That's right.
Your idea might actually inspire someone else to come up with a creative idea.
Well, the reason I'll tell you, I mean, all 10 I think are important, but in this one uniquely, and you just kind of alluded to it, that when you kill bad ideas too quick, the people in the room who aren't as secure in their role or in their voice or whatever, they're not going to share it. They're not going to share their idea because they're afraid of getting shut down. I mean, again, none of us are longing for more rejection in our life. And so we're not going to share the idea if we think it's going to get shut down too quick. And to your point, and you know this, every room has people whose words carry more weight. I was a lead pastor for 13 years. Every room I was in, my idea, unfortunately, good or bad, carried more weight than everyone else's. And we had to figure out a way around that. And so not just saying it, but doing it, allowing people to share bad ideas. Listen, to be honest, I never told our team this. Sometimes I would share horrible ideas on purpose just to make sure we weren't killing them and to let the people around me who were younger, newer in their roles, not as maybe they didn't feel as comfortable in the meeting. If they were like, well, if that idiot just shared that idea, my idea isn't as bad anymore, right? So again, making that a rule, but then actually holding the rule in place is so critical to engaging everyone in the meeting.
Yeah. All right. So number one, don't kill a bad idea too soon. We'll let you decide how long too soon is. You got to leave it on the whiteboard for a little while.
Well, you kill it. You kill it when
kill
you end up choosing the idea you're going to go with, right? So
There
you have
you
100
go.
ideas at the end of the meeting, and then when you have a follow-up meeting where you're not in creative mode, now you're in decision-making mode, right? That's when things get killed.
Yeah. Now, the second one on the list here, I'm going to say that I was somewhat convicted, maybe not to current or recent events in my life, but looking back to creative planning meetings that I actually used to facilitate as the worship pastor and creative arts director in the church where I served. And that is, in that meeting, this is the way you state this: stick to wow, not how. Why don't you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I love these. I love the how people. We need how people. If we just had wow people, we get nothing done. So we need people who can orchestrate. The problem is that when we're in the middle of an ideate and then everybody wants to start orchestrating, it destroys the ideation. So we have to really delineate between, is this meeting about ideas or is this meeting about implementation? And so that's the difference, wow and how. So we even adopted that common language, which again, common language is so important. We didn't want to only invite the hyper creatives in every one of these creative meetings. We needed some people who could think through it with a more level head. The problem is that those more level-headed thinkers oftentimes wanted to shut down the conversations because an idea seems so ridiculous that all they can think of is, how are we going to do this? Do we have budget? Do we have time? It's all those do's. And we need to answer those, but not yet. We save that for later. And so I can tell you, I won't give you hundreds of examples, but I'll give you one really quick one. I mean, we were doing a series. I loved the October season in church because of the pairing with Halloween and the fall. And there's so much fun biblical stuff you can do that feels a little bit, it leans into the mysterious side. So we did a series called Scared to Death that I did. I had a bad idea that we couldn't shut down because of the rule. We had a wow moment where I said, what if we created a really fun haunted house experience in the lobby of the church? Just go with me for a minute. And we put cameras inside of it so that you could sit in the auditorium and have the camera feed into the room, watch people be scared before they come into church. You don't have to go through it if you don't want, but we get to watch the people who do. I thought it was brilliant, right? Now, immediately, one of our staff members goes, well, that's going to cost, and we have to get wood, and we have to, I'm like, look, no, who cares? And then we ended up not doing it for lots of good reasons. But that bad idea, because we didn't allow it to be killed and we didn't allow the how person to dominate that meeting, it led to some really good ideas around that series that were probably even better than a haunted house in the lobby of the church. But with all of that, with not letting the how person dominate it, it allowed it to evolve over time and, marinate with all of us. And it led to doing some really cool stuff with the series. But there's a time and place for wow. It just isn't in the creative meeting.
Well, let me ask you a question then. This actually makes me think of something else. And when you're having a creative meeting, is it important in those early stages to maybe even decide who is and who should and who shouldn't be in those meetings? Would you create really some profiles? If you get too many hows in the room, then it's really difficult to create the wow. What are your thoughts on that?
Here's the challenge, though. If you don't have any of the orchestrators in the room, the people who are going to pull it off, if they are absent from the meeting, they're absent from the conversation and the passion and the energy around it. And you can't ask people to buy into something if they don't get to weigh into it. That's just a leadership principle, right? So what we learned is in the creative meetings, our creative people on the teams would get so fired up, so excited. Our orchestrators would be not quite as thrilled about the meeting. And that's okay, because we knew later in the week we were going to reverse the conversation and we were going to have an orchestration meeting. And they were going to get to be the ones choosing and picking and killing stuff, where the creative types got to, we'll talk about this later, but had to put their big boy pants on a little bit. And, just because it's a good idea doesn't mean we can do it all the time, right? I mean, it's $1 million idea. It's fantastic, but, we've got $50, so we can't do it. So, I enjoyed bringing in some of those orchestrators into the room and then coaching them through how to sit through the process well, because they needed to hear where we were heading with the ideas. So as they even began orchestrating and building, sets or whatever they're doing, that they understood where it came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to give a plug for, and I'm going to assume that you've at least familiar with the content of Patrick Lencioni's 6 Types of Working Genius.
Absolutely.
We've done that with our team here at Missional Marketing, and it has been incredibly insightful. Not that we don't include all 6 types of working genius in our planning meetings, in our creative meetings, but going through that process has actually helped us all better understand who's sitting in what seats and who's actually going to be most engaged and most helpful in which process or part of the process of dreaming up ideas and then discerning those ideas and then executing on those ideas. So I
would never suggest that a church does this, but the idea is right. You've seen, you maybe watched The West Wing or some show on the president, the White House, what have you. There's a boardroom table where the president, vice president, whoever else is in director level roles is sitting around the table, and around the perimeter of the room, you have all of these supporting staff, these support, infrastructure people. They're not there to talk; they're there to listen. The people at the table talk, the people in the perimeter listen. Would never structure it that way, but at least in the church. But when we would sit around a table and talk, we all sat around it, but our creatives knew that was their space to be creative. Our orchestrators knew, or how people knew that wasn't the place for them to be very vocal. They needed to listen a lot more than talk in that moment. Yeah, because they knew that their day was coming. They knew that their meeting was coming. We weren't going to do all 100 ideas, but if they began to get too vocal in the beginning, it shut the whole thing down. And so what it really gave me as a leader an opportunity to coach them up on how to participate in those meetings well. And again, too, like with the working genius, the more you know about yourself, the better you're able to provide what God has gifted you uniquely to do in the spaces where you find yourself.
Yeah. And I would say, as a leader, if you're the person who's in charge of that meeting, it's important for you to have pretty good clarity on where people's natural giftings and where they lean. So, one of the things that came clear for us as a team at Missional Marketing when we were going through the 6 Types of Working Genius is that our CEO, Jason Hamrock, is a WI. He's a wonder and invention guy. He just loves creating ideas, dreaming up new things. And he's the kind of guy that he'll fill the dry erase board with creative ideas. While our CFO is a T. I think at the other end of the widget, he's the guy that likes to check off the boxes and get things done. Yep. And so they would sit in meetings, and Jason's coming up with 84 in his mind, the best ideas on the planet. And Kevin's writing down the checklist of all the things he's going to have to do. And he's realizing he's not going to be sleeping for the next 6 months. Yeah. But in the middle there is a group of people who are discerners and people who are equipping and empowering others. And it's that middle group that actually helps you decide, hey, which of these 64 ideas, we can only do 3. Which of the 3 are going to actually help us accomplish what we most want to accomplish? Because there's 60 plus others that we just simply can't or aren't going to be able to do. And so it minimizes the actual execution work that needs to get done. And it gets you back to what you were saying just a minute ago, and we'll talk about this in a moment about, some of those ideas get shut down. They get erased off the dry erase board, and the people who came up with those ideas have to learn to live with that. So that's
right. Well, I think it's better. I think it's just better as a leader to have diversity in every conversation. And you name the version of diversity, it's better to have it. So in this, in a creative meeting, it's actually unhealthy to only have high creatives. Yeah. You need other people in there because you need their minds, you need their perspectives, you need to see it the way that they see it, because the more eyes we have on it, usually the more holistically we'll make decisions.
I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in to the Missional Marketing Podcast. It's always our goal to help you as a church leader leverage your communications and digital media resources to reach more people for Jesus. One of the ways that we help churches do that is through creating social media content from your Sunday sermon videos. Specifically, what we can do for you is to create short sermon snippets from 30 seconds long to 5 minutes long, capturing those mic drop moments that you really want people to remember. We edit the videos, add captions, add your church branding, and then you or we post them to your social media channels. As a pastor, I always love to see my sermon content live on beyond the Sundays, and I know that's what you value for your sermons too. We offer this service as a monthly subscription, but we've got a 6-week trial that gives you a chance to see how it works. If you'd like more information, just shoot me an email at bblair@missionalmarketing.com. I'd be glad to meet with you, explain the process, and answer any questions that you have. Once again, thanks for tuning into our podcast. Let's get back to the interview.
Yep.
Our third point that we want to emphasize here is no dismissing ideas, but you can plus them. Why don't you expand on that a little bit? What does that really mean? What is plussing an idea?
I think this is when we were creating these rules, this one came out because we sat around and talked about it honestly. And we said, well, if you can't kill an idea, no matter how stupid it is, and by the way, we know we're not going to do it. So why are we even spending time on it, right? There was always that tension. And then we had the how people in the room. And they're listening and trying so hard to bite their lip and keep their mouth shut. So what can we do to give everyone space to not shut it down, but let's also call it what it is? So my friend Jason Hodges, he is on staff in Orlando at First Baptist Church Orlando now. He was my production director for a decade. He's a very close friend. This was his phrase. He came up with this, that we want to plus things. So the first time he said it, I made a note and I asked him later. I was like, we need to talk about that phrase more. So he said, okay, that's an interesting idea. Let me plus one that idea. What if we also, and so what it did is it in a way redirected or course corrected sometimes good ideas, sometimes terrible ideas without telling the person that's a terrible idea. But we were able to kind of move it into a space that was either more achievable, more practical, or just better aligned with the series or the church or the mission, what have you. So I just love that verbiage, to plus something, not to dismiss something.
Yeah. My early adult life, I did some performing and worked in theater and took some improv classes and did some improv stuff. And, one of the things when you're doing improv, you're trained early on that when someone asks you a question in an improvised scene, you don't ever want to say no if they ask you a question. Correct. You want to say yes, and then you go into the next thing. And so when I read that on your list, I was like, yeah, that's kind of the yes and thing.
It is. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right. No dismissing ideas, but you can plus them. All right. We've already alluded to this one a couple of times already. And this is, you gotta wear your big boy pants. Who's got to wear their big boy pants, Gavin?
Everybody. Everybody does. And we probably should not be too, male about it. You got to wear our big adult pants, whatever we would call.
Yeah, but put your grown-up pants on. Yeah,
put your grown-up pants on. But I think the issue with this is when we come to creative meetings, and I'm the worst. I'm a creative person, and so I have ideas, and I think mine are the best. And so, because I created them, of course they're the best. And if you're in a senior leadership role, especially like a senior pastor, or what have you, you're having a creative meeting for a series you're doing. Well, it's your content. I mean, if anyone knows the direction and where you're heading, it's you. So to walk in with a predetermined idea and then have everyone around the table go, let me plus that, or, okay, that's a good idea, but here's some other ideas. We're like, no, we don't need other ideas. I just gave you the idea, right? So I think it's harder the higher up we go to let go of our darlings, right? Like we know as authors, we say you got to let go of your darlings, you got to cut your darlings. So I think on one end, you got the more dominant people in the organization. They have to walk in acknowledging they have predetermined ideas that might not be the right ones. They got to put their big boy pants on, and they have to be willing to admit that and listen. On the other side, you have people walking in with terrible ideas, and they are bad ideas. And we're not going to crush them. We're not going to kill those ideas. But if your idea doesn't make it or it doesn't become the idea, you can't pout about it, and you can't kind of take your ball and go home. Like, we have another meeting next week. We need you to bring your best to that meeting too. And so I think, especially for the point leader, helping everybody recognize the value they bring, even if their idea isn't taken. So when you see someone pouting or being dismissive or disengaging, the problem is they just didn't wear their big boy pants that day. And it's okay to acknowledge that, pull them aside. But I would remind everybody at the beginning of the meeting, I wouldn't use this terminology necessarily, but I would say, hey, we're going to probably have tons of really bad ideas at this meeting. We're going to probably have some good ones. If you think yours is good and nobody else agrees, that's okay. But put your big boy pants on. We can't do it all anyway. So some verbiage that's maybe less offensive, but I like that we got to be adults about this,
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and it really hits home. And creative people do tend to be somewhat sensitive. And
yes, I know I am one, so I know.
Yeah, and you add to the fact that when I'm creative and I do come up with ideas, I do sometimes grow very attached to my ideas.
Of course,
and the sign of a great collaborating team is one in which everybody contributes and everybody's ideas, to some degree, are demonstrated to have some value and some worth. But you can't do everything every time. There are going to be times where your great idea, maybe it just doesn't work now, and maybe it'll work later in another time, in another place.
One specific thought about this, I think Brene Brown is the first person I heard say this. I don't know if she made up the term, but it's psychological safety that, if everybody can come to the meeting with their big boy pants on, we can have an unfiltered debate, unfiltered conversation. But if everybody is coming in to the meeting with insecurity, or they're struggling to separate who they are and what they do, there's identity issues in that. When we have a room full of that, you can't get anywhere, because nothing is psychologically safe, and no one feels safe. So you can't even say, let me plus one that, or, ooh, what if we, because then everybody gets their feelings hurt. If even we liked 95% of it, but there's 5% we want to make better. So I think just walking in, as if we all can do this all the time, but walk into these meetings as a facilitator or as a participant, knowing that we have to kind of bring our big boy pants to the meeting. We have to walk in and allow our identity to not be determined by our idea. We have to walk in with acknowledging that our idea might not actually be the best idea, and when we can all walk in that way, we can have unfiltered debate, and then that's what elevates the real good ideas.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. For the sake of time, we're going to move on to the next one. And I was glad that I decided we were only going to hit 5 of these instead of 10. And I'm just going to remind our listeners that there are 10 points in this article. We're only talking about the first 5, and they've all been really good. We've been through 4. This is the last one we're going to hit in this discussion, but there are 5 more that you need to go to Gavin's website and read. Okay. The last one that we're going to talk about here, some personal conviction, and I have a personal story to share, but I want to let you unpack this a little bit. And this is, pay attention to how much you listen. Pay attention to how much you listen.
Yeah, I mentioned this a little earlier, but I think so many times we get in meetings and we nod our head, but all we're doing is thinking of what we're about to say next. And we've already got it preloaded. We're kind of like ready, fire, aim, right? Well, that's not active listening. That's just pretending. My dad would say constantly to me as a kid, are you hearing me or listening to me? And what he meant was you're not, you're nodding your head, but the words aren't sinking in. You're not really listening because you already have your comeback. You already have your defense. You already have your idea ready to go. So when we talk about listening, and this could not be more important for the senior leader in the room, whoever you are, right? Senior pastor, or whoever has the biggest job in the room, in the meeting, your words carry so much weight. And so I almost feel like the higher you are in the org chart, the more time you should spend listening in these meetings, because your words are going to carry more weight than everybody's. And you have the potential to accidentally misdirect the meeting, to shut down the meeting. Inadvertently, you can do so much more damage with your words because of the weight that they carry. So, I would tell some of our more senior leaders in their meetings, I'm like, hey, you got 3 comments you can make this meeting. So use them well. If you use them in the first 5 minutes, man, it's gonna be a long meeting. You're gonna be sitting and listening a lot. So I just think it's important that we all do that. But of course, the higher you are in the org chart, the more that you spend time actively listening to the people around you.
I've heard stories that John Maxwell brings his leaders and his group together simply to ask them questions and to listen to the answers that they give. And if someone like John Maxwell, who is considered by some to be, he's probably top 10 leadership gurus on the planet, in the last,
we would all consider him a great leader, if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. And so I said just a minute ago, I read this and I had a little bit of personal conviction, because here's the reality. It's pretty much impossible to listen when your mouth is open.
Correct.
Right. And I'm a flashback about half of my lifetime ago, which was about 26 years ago. I was working in the corporate world. It was before I started working at church. And was advancing in the company that I was working in and was part of a regular weekly lunch meeting where the controller of our division brought all these leaders in. And I was kind of in the middle of the group. And we would eat lunch together and he would ask ideas and we would talk about different things. And to be perfectly honest, it was 26 years ago. I can't even remember what things we were talking about. But here's one thing I do remember. When we walked out of a meeting one time, I remember Scott pulling me aside and I remember him saying to me, "Hey, Bart, the next time we have this meeting, I want you to be the last one to talk in the meeting." And I was like, well, why is that? And he went on to say, "You have great ideas. You always seem to have great insight and everything that you contribute in the conversation is very helpful." He said, "But because you tend to always be one of the first ones to talk, I think that there's a possibility that there are other people in the room who might share some of the same ideas and some of the same insights that you do, but you're not giving them an opportunity to share them before you do. And therefore, they don't know that they even have a place to contribute to the conversation." Now, I'll be the first to admit I'm still a work in progress 26 years later. I sit in a meeting and I sometimes just biting my tongue and sitting on my hands, and I'm trying to practice active listening, not just like waiting for that next thing to come out. It's something that I have to work really, really hard to do. But I know that as I plan with other teams and when I bring teams together to work on things, it is that one conversation that I had 26 years ago has completely changed my perspective on the way that I participate in meetings. And so I appreciate you including that on the list. There's the active listening piece, but there's also the piece that's just simply not being the one who's always got the best idea in the room.
Well, I mean, I'm a verbal processor. I'm an external processor. And so I work better when I can extrovert and I can ideate better. However, we only have an hour meeting or a 2-hour meeting. I can't spend 45 minutes of it verbally processing. So I just think, again, so much about this is self-awareness, but knowing who you are coming into these rooms. There are people with brilliant ideas who are going to be quieter, more introverted. Well, if the dominant external processor or the leader with the heavy weighted words, if they're the one always talking, we shut out potentially great, brilliant ideas because we're not creating space by being quiet, honestly, and just listening.
Yeah. To finish up that story, I actually about a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago, 9 months ago or so, I had lunch with that boss or dinner. He lives in the Baltimore area and we got together for dinner and I hadn't seen him in probably close to 20 years. And I recounted that story for him and I told him what impact that moment had made on me. And he looked at me and he goes, "I said that?
Yeah.
Wow. I was pretty smart." He's like, that was the greatest thing about it is that he didn't even realize that what he was telling me was going to help me the way that it's helped me. So exactly. If you're a leader and you're listening to this, don't downplay the influence that you have on others simply by telling them what they need to hear in a loving and caring way.
And then displaying it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have covered 5 rules to keep creative meetings creative. I'm going to recap them here real quick. Don't kill a bad idea too soon. Stick to wow, not how. Number 3 is no dismissing ideas, but you can plus them. The 4th one, you got to wear your grown-up britches.
Yeah.
I'll rephrase that. And finally, how are we going to phrase that? And finally, pay attention to how much you listen. If you are a creative director or a part of the creative team in your church, these are 5 rules that I think will really serve you well if you can begin to implement these into your creative process. And again, make sure that you click over to Gavin's website to read the other 5 because you can apply those 5 as well. I've mentioned your website several times. Gavin, why don't you share with our audience a little bit about how they can learn more about what you're doing in ministry, how they can connect with you?
Yeah, thanks. Just gavinadams.com is where it's all located. I've got lots of free resources, courses, masterclasses, consulting engagements, and content to help leaders just like your listeners be better at their jobs and lead the teams around them as best they can.
Thank you, Gavin. Little rumor that you're working on a book. And so one of these days when the moon when the earth has circled the sun
Yeah.
another time,
Yeah.
we'll have you back on the show, and hopefully we'll be able to be the beneficiary of learning some more wisdom and leadership from you. Appreciate you hanging out with me today.
That's kind of you to say. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.